The original person who wrote the play Peter Pan's name was Meredith Willson, and he had one of the most important quotes on reviewing your life and on changing your life. What J.M. Barrie said was that the life of every person is like a diary in which he is writing one story while at the same time meaning to write another. His most humble hour is to compare the volume as he's written it, or even as he's writing it, with as how he vowed to write it. And so I love this quote. This quote basically just says that your life is like a diary in which you're writing one story while at the same time you were intending to write another. And your most humble hour is when you compare the volume as you've written it with how you are writing it, and then you can ask yourself, do you want to change it? In this video, I'm going to talk about journaling and the power of journaling, and I'm going to give you specific models for really how to use your journal, not only to transform and heal your past, such as healing trauma, but also how to create the future you want and how to get clear in the present. I'm going to give you some powerful journal prompts and tips. I've been journaling for decades. These are some of my journals up above, but I have also another set of journals at my house. So before I go into the mechanics of journaling, I'm going to give you the why behind journaling, and I'm going to do that by showing you a model that I created on how a psychologist would view time. I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I've been studying the psychology of time and identity for over a decade. I'm going to show you how you can utilize your past self, present self, and future self to continuously improve your life and transform your life. And really, once you have this model and once you understand how time and identity work, then you can start using your journal in very powerful, very effective ways and in very simple ways. And at the end of this video, I'm going to also just show you some simple processes or strategies for using your journals at certain times, such as the morning and the evening, so that you can sleep better, have better health. There's so much research on journaling. Journaling is one of the most powerful ways of healing trauma, reshaping your story, reframing a negative trauma, but also shaping your future self, living from your future self. Also, gratitude journaling right before bed so that you literally are happier, sleep better, and have better health. So let me go ahead and show you this model of time and identity. And once you understand this, you'll understand the core premises of how to journal effectively, when to journal, and how to use your journal to heal yourself, but also to create your life and large part shape your dreams. So your identity is how you operate in the world. There's a great quote from Stephen R. Covey. He said, "We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are." In other words, we see the world through our identity. And once you change yourself, you change how you see the world. Once you change your vision of what you want and what you care about, psychologists call this selective attention. You see what you're looking for, and what you focus on, you create more of. The common way of looking at life in the most basic way is for people to say, live in the present, ignore the past, and ignore the future. Just live in the present. That's cliche common advice, but it fails to comprehend that from a psychological standpoint, your entire experience in the present is based on your views of and your story of your past, and also your views of and your story for your future. As far as the future, there's a concept called default future. We all have a default future, which is not the future we want or hope for. It's actually the future we most expect. And that's actually the future we're organically creating. And that's the future that's in large part driving and shaping us. So let me start with the past. And I'm going to go through the past, present, and future to show you ultimately how you can journal in such ways to master your past, continuously reframe and retransform your past, but also to master your future, get clear on your future, and then operate as your future self. But before we do this, let's just look at the common way. So the common way of looking at time is to look at it linearly and sequentially. By sequentially, I mean that the past comes first, and then the present, and then the future, and that the past is driving the present, and that the past is like a domino knocking over the present. This view of time is what some psychologists would call deterministic. But this is how most psychologists viewed time for a long time. And it makes sense. We think that the present is based on the past, but there's actually a better way of looking at it, and it's more in alignment with how memory is shaped and how identity is shaped. So there's a great book called Time and Psychological Explanation by Brent Slife. Brent Slife is a theoretical psychologist, but he said it's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. So what happens is most people actually project the past onto the present. And what I mean by that is that they think that the past is what happened to them and that their present experience is because of the past. So it's going in this direction, and they really don't have any control over what happened. This is viewing time as this happened to me. This is actually how trauma happens, by the way, as well. So trauma happens when you let the past happen to you, and you believe that the present is worse off because of the past, and that there's really nothing you can do about it. Post-traumatic growth, which there's an enormous amount of research on, shows that it's not actually the past that dictates the present, it's the present that dictates the meaning of the past, the value of the past and the usefulness of the past. So back to that quote by Dr. Brent Slife, he said it's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. So this is where journaling comes in, and this is where you start to take control of the narrative of your past. A few important factors here. One is recognizing that you are not the same person as your past self. You're not the same person you were a year ago. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago. You're not even the same person you were a week ago. And so rather than overly clinging to the past and overly defining your present by your past, you actually recognize the difference between the present and the past, and you also recognize the difference between your present and your past self. A super important point here is to realize that your past self was doing the best that they could with what they had. I myself have made massive call-it mistakes, but I love the quote that there are no mistakes in life, only lessons, and lessons are repeated until learned. And so my past self did a lot of things with less information, less emotional development, less skills, less perspectives, less experience than I now have. And so there's no reason for me to be mad at my past self. Actually, you just want to love your past self. You want to have empathy towards your past self. You want to have gratitude towards your past self. You want to celebrate your past self because they were massively resilient and they did the best they could with what they had. But you do want to recognize that you're not the same person as you were in the past, and you would do things differently. That's a big aspect of having mastery, is just actually recognizing who you were, where you were, what you were dealing with. And so this would be part of journaling, is writing about where you were and how you were dealing with what you were dealing with, whatever it could have been. A challenging situation, an area where you may have made some mistakes, or literally painful experiences. Just recognizing that the person you were was doing the best they could and that they deserve empathy, love, and compassion. There's a great quote actually from William Faulkner. He said that the past is never dead, it's not even past. And the point of this is that a big aspect of your present experience is the version of the past you're carrying with you. This is why you want to transform the past continually. You want to transform the meaning of it, transform the experience of it. This is why you want to shape the past from the present. And this is actually how it works anyways. If you look at culture, we're always looking back on the past, on history, and we're always framing it from the perspective of the present, which is totally fine, but you want to do this in a masterful way. You want to view the past as something that always happened for you, not to you. You also want to continuously increase the value of your past. And you do that by learning lessons from it, by continuously improving it. Your past is something you can improve through skill. This is part of where journaling comes in, is gaining lessons, gaining wisdom, gaining perspective. You can either increase the value of a certain experience or you can decrease it. This is the difference between a bad experience and a good experience. It has nothing to do with what the experience was, but how you frame it and what you do with it. So as an example, you may have, let's just call it you had a business presentation and you totally flopped it. You could say that that was a bad experience and therefore it's an experience that happened to you, or you could happen to the experience, which means that you, rather than devaluing it and just calling it a quote unquote bad experience, you could actually frame it as it was an incredible experience. The choice is yours. A good experience is an experience that you value, that you're grateful for, and that you're getting lots of value from. But it's your choice to gain value from an experience. This is part of the mastery, where you're actually looking at it and gaining lessons from it and totally learning from it, and then ultimately being grateful for it. That's a big part of post-traumatic growth, by the way. And so how does this work from a journaling standpoint? From a journaling standpoint, you pull out your journal and you actually just write about the experience. In psychology, you either have an approach mindset or an avoidance mindset. An avoidance mindset means you're avoiding dealing with certain situations or certain people out of fear, whereas an approach mindset means that you're literally approaching it and you're proactively, openly, curiously framing it, learning from it, increasing value from it. And so if you're avoiding your past, and your past is something you feel is happening to you and you really have no control over it, and you're blaming your present on your past rather than using your present to transform your past, if you're blaming your present on your past and you're actually literally avoiding dealing with it, then that's an avoidance mindset. And if you're avoiding transforming your past into lessons, growth, learning, and increasing its value, by increasing its value and by being increasingly grateful for it, by turning every experience into increasingly better experiences, your present gets better. So by approaching your past, learning from it, increasing value, learning from it, choosing to gain lessons from it, choosing to be grateful for it, and learning more and more from it, your present gets better. By avoiding it, your past gets worse and worse, as does your present and as does your future. If you're avoiding your past, you're going to be avoiding challenging, difficult emotions in the present, and your whole life is going to be avoidance-based. And when you have an avoidance-based life, that leads you to addictions and distractions because you're trying to cope with the frustration of unresolved issues. By approaching your past, by transforming it, by being grateful for it, by continually turning every experience into lessons learned. Dan Sullivan and I actually wrote a book on this subject called The Gap in the Gain. And The Gap in the Gain is all about not only measuring yourself backwards, so you're only comparing your present self with your past self, but you're also continuously transforming every experience into a gain. This is how I view trauma. This is also how I view moving on from an experience. When you move on from an experience or when you move on from a relationship, often there's a stage of grieving, but you only start to move forward once that grieving turns into celebration. Rather than continuously grieving and feeling like what happened was a loss, you actually feel like it was a gain. And that's actually what post-traumatic growth is rather than viewing an experience and framing it as a loss, even if you quote unquote lose a loved one, you focus on the gain, you focus on the celebration. And once you get it to that place where you've increased the value and it's in a positive celebratory perspective, and you focus on all the reasons your life is blessed and better, then you can actually utilize the experience to move forward and be better rather than being bitter. This is being bitter. This is being better. So let me quote Brent's life again, and then I'm going to give you some perspectives on journaling. It's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. You in the present are the one who determines what your past is, what the story is, and you get to reframe the story over and over. And as you become more mature and more emotionally developed and healthy in the present, you can then, with all honesty, I love the quote, all progress starts by telling the truth, you can go back to the past and openly acknowledge where your past self didn't have the same emotional maturity and development as you do now. And wherever you can make amends and just, transform your past. You can actually pull the quality of your past up to the quality of your new understanding and resolve any challenges you had. Let me give an example. A couple months ago, I reached a level of understanding that one of my relationships no longer fit my vision of my future self. And rather than being humble about it, I was actually frustrated. This is a theme that I've caught in myself. Is that often when I reach a place where I see that the relationship is no longer moving in a shared direction, I've found that I get frustrated, and that's something that I'm now working on. And so I got frustrated in a situation which led to an unhealthy direction of the relationship, but I've now grown so much from that. I've learned a lot, and I recognize that how I approached that wasn't the wisest way. I would do it differently if I could go back with my newfound wisdom and perspective. But I don't need to be mad at my past self. But I can go back, and to the extent I can, strive to resolve the relationship. Not that necessarily I need to go back to the relationship, but I can explain to them that I'm really sorry for how I approached it, and I see that I could have approached it better. I was doing the best I could, and I'm sorry. And, just that's part of just having empathy. And I can't control their perspective. I can't control, I love the quote, you don't see the outside world, you only see your own reaction to it. I can't control other people's perceptions. I can't control how other people view me, but I can control my own perceptions. I can get better and better at becoming aware of my perceptions. And I can also take control of owning where I could have done things better. But I can control what I do in the present and how I utilize that to heal and transform things that happened in the past. Ultimately, I get to decide that the experience was a good experience or a bad experience. This is one of the things that Dan taught me, which I love, is he said, you're either happening to your experience or your experience is happening to you. If you're happening to your experience, what that means is that you realize you're the only one who has access to your past. You're the only one who actually can go back into your memories. And what the research in neuroscience, basically what memory is it's a reconstruction. You can never actually go to the past. You can only reconstruct it from the perspective of your present. And so if you reconstruct your memory of the past, and also then you go and you learn new lessons from it, and you go and you resolve things, you actually change the meaning of the past. You change the story. You change the narrative. And you also heal and love and respect your past self, thus that you're no longer carrying around a past self that you're angry at or frustrated at. You're actually carrying around a past self that you're celebrating, you love, and you care for. And so to journal, you just journal about past experiences, and you turn those experiences into quote unquote gains or lessons. What are all the reasons why you're better as a result of this and not bitter? How can you be grateful for this experience? How can you be better? Not too long ago, I gave a speech on a stage, and it just did not go as well as I wanted. And as soon as I walked off stage, I was so frustrated because I knew it could have been better. And so initially I was like, that was not good. And I was frustrated about it. But instead, I've just learned enormous amounts from it. And now I truly am grateful for it. I actually believe it was an incredible experience. And so you want to value your experiences and increase the value of your experiences. And you just do that by simply approaching them, writing about them, respecting your past self, acknowledging the difference between your current and your past self, and writing all the ways in which you're better and grateful, and then expressing that to people who may have been relevant, people where maybe you were frustrated or angry. This is part of having an approach mindset. It's also part of being humble and open. It's just acknowledging that that's where I was, but I'm not there anymore. And I'm so grateful that I had that experience and I learned a lot from it. Once you start to get to the place of celebrating and recognizing and appreciating the past and learning from it and gaining greater meaning, perspective, and growth. Basically, if you feel you're better as a result, meaning your present is going upwards, not downwards because of the past, then that's you taking mastery and taking control of your past and ultimately learning from it, valuing it, gaining it. And this is how you make your present better and better. It's also how you make your past better and better. Actually, you make your present better by making your past better. You also make your present better by making your future bigger. This takes us to the future. So obviously you can write about the past and continuously transform your past. And one thing I just want to say is that your mastery over your past and your mastery over your future is really what journaling is all about. It's also what your identity is all about, because your identity is the story you have about your past self and your future self. And it's the story and the narration you have of these things and the meaning you give to these things. Rather than seeing time as moving sequentially forward, time is more holistic. The past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, and when you change one, you change them all. When you heal and transform the meaning of the past, you now have let go of so much baggage and healing in the present, which opens up new possibilities for the future. When you clarify and reimagine the future, and you start thinking about the future and using the future as your filter for what you do, it changes what you see in the present and also maybe even changes what you see about the past. All of these things are existing simultaneously. They're all transforming like a system. When you change a part, you change the whole. So time doesn't operate sequentially. It actually operates holistically and subjectively. Just to kind of wrap this up, we've talked about the past, let's talk about the future. Most people assume that the past is what determines the present and the present is what determines the future. In other words, a lot of people project the past onto the present. And so when you're operating this way, you overly attach to the past. And this is a fixed mindset where you say that this is who I was and this is who I'm always going to be. And you overly cling. This is actually psychological rigidity. You overly cling to certain perspectives. But people do this with the future as well. They overly project the present onto the future. So there's a lot of research, and I would actually point people to the TED Talk by Dr. Daniel Gilbert. Dr. Daniel Gilbert gave a TED Talk back in 2014. He's a Harvard psychologist. His TED Talk was called The Psychology of Your Future Self. And basically what Daniel Gilbert said is that most people don't spend very much time imagining their future selves. And as a result, they overly project their present self onto their future self. What that means is that they assume that their future self is going to look a lot like their present self. They assume that the future is going to look a lot like the present.
Most of us can remember who we were 10 years ago, but we find it hard to imagine who we're going to be. And then we mistakenly think that because it's hard to imagine, it's not likely to happen. Sorry, when people say, I can't imagine that, they're usually talking about their own lack of imagination.
The truth is that the future is going to be way different from the present. The truth is also that the present is really different from the past. This is why mastery over the past is a recognition that your current self is different from your past self even a week ago, even a day ago. If you take time to journal and reflect on how am I different from who I was a week ago or a day ago, this would be a part of your evening journaling is what did I learn today? Even if today went to pots, even if today didn't go as I planned, what did I learn today that allows me to be better? And when you do that, you actually increase the value of the day. You frame the day as a positive, as a good experience, even if everything went to trash. You can still say, how am I better as a result of this? What do I now know that I didn't know before? How can I utilize this to be better? And that's ultimately having a framing of everything happens for you, not to you. This is what Nassim Taleb would call anti-fragile. Anti-fragile means that with volatility or challenges, you always get better. It's the opposite of being fragile. People who are fragile or systems that are fragile get worse with volatility and challenges. If you're anti-fragile, you're always getting better as a result of what happened. If you're fragile, you're always getting worse and blaming what happened on where you're at. You in the present have massive ability to continuously become better and better, more anti-fragile. And so at the end of your day, at the end of your week, always reflect, what do I now know that I didn't know a day ago or a week ago or a month ago? How am I better? What can I now do that my past self couldn't do? How can I be grateful for those experiences? What am I grateful for? So back to the future now. And I didn't mean that as a movie reference, by the way.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Rather than operating towards the future and overly presenting the present to the future. By the way, this is a linear approach to life. A more non-linear approach and a more masterful approach would be, first off, imagining the future. Imagination is more important than knowledge, but then using the future to dictate who you are and what you do in the present. In other words, thinking about your future self, maybe 5 or 10 years into the future, and recognizing how different your future self will be. In 10 years from now, your future self is going to have much different perspectives, values, and cares. And so actually think about that future self and get empathetic towards that future self. Take time to journal about who you want your future self to be, but also think about where your future self is at and what they care about. Dr. Hal Hershfield is a UCLA psychologist, and he's studied this for a long time, and he's found that most people don't have very much empathy for their future self. Empathy is the basis of a relationship. Empathy is the basis of a friendship. And so you ultimately want to become friends with your future self, but a big part of that is recognizing that they are very, very different from you. And so they are not you. And so you want to recognize who is your future self, but also imagination is more important than knowledge. Who do you want your future self to be? There's also a lot of research that talks about impossible goals. This comes from constraint theory and a guy named Dr. Alan Bernard. I actually wrote about both of these topics, by the way, in 10x is easier than 2x. A lot of research on impossible goals here. And then be your future self now. Like this details a lot of the research on this. The Gap and the Gain, by the way, is a book I wrote with Dan Sullivan. And this book, from my perspective, The Gap and the Gain is really about mastery over your past. Future Self is about mastery of the future. And I think that this book actually just puts it all on steroids and gives you the most practical path to doing it at exponential levels. Just so you know, if you haven't read those books, check them out. I'm going to go back to the model for a second. So when you start operating exponentially, you first off imagine your desired future self, but then you think, how can I be my future self now? What would my future self do? You let your future self dictate what you do in the present. Dr. Hal Hershfield again said that the more connected you are to your future self, the better the decisions you make in the present. This is about living strategically and intentionally. There's a great quote that says, the bigger the vision, the better the decisions. But it's also the idea that the more clear you are on your future self, the more directed you can be in the present. If you don't know where you want to go, then your present is aimless. So this could, actually, there's a lot of research, there's a great story on this by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And there's a lot of research on this now, but it basically what Viktor Frankl found, so he was living during World War II in the concentration camps in, the German Nazis, and he wrote about it in Man's Search for Meaning. But basically what he said is that if you don't have a purpose or a goal for your future, then your present loses meaning. And if your present loses meaning, then you become retrospective in your thoughts, and ultimately in those situations, you desire to commit suicide or just die. Basically, he said, when the why is strong enough, you can bear any how, but also when the why is strong enough, you will find the how. When finding the how comes to a lot of the research on hope and finding pathways and being strategic and deliberate practice in terms of the goal shapes the process, and the more committed you are to the goal, the more you will evolve yourself and iterate. This hits actually the quote from Naval Ravikant. Naval Ravikant said that becoming an outlier is not about 10,000 hours, it's about 10,000 iterations. And so it's the goal that shapes the process. And so when you make the goal higher, the process actually becomes simpler and clearer because now you're required to get better. The main point of all of this is that you want to ultimately utilize the future as the filter for your decision-making process. You get connected to your future self and you think, what would my future self do now? How could I be in alignment with my future self and do things that, you could honestly start being your future self now and operating from the identity of your future self. There's a great model for this called thinking to feeling to knowing. You go about first thinking about your future self. Whatever you think about, you become. I love the book As a Man Thinketh, by the way. In that book, James Allen says, we do not attract what we want, but who we are. Truth is you're always attracting stuff to you, but the more intentional and clear you get about your future self, and you go from thinking about your future self, imagination is more important to knowledge, to feeling. There's a lot on the topic of feeling, and I think Dr. Joe Dispenza's work is some of the best on this topic about getting to the place of acceptance and allowance. Future-based gratitude, where you get to the place of accepting and allowing that what you want is what you are and who you are, and then getting to a place of knowing. There's a great quote from Stephen Covey. He said, to know and not do is to really not know. So if you know something, then you will do, you will apply. But also, there's a great quote from Florence Shin. She said, faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. So you want to get to the place of thinking to feeling to knowing. And then ultimately you use your future self as the filter to being your future self now. There's another model that says you have to be before you can do and do before you can have. So being is knowing. Being is getting to a place of acceptance, and then you start being your future self now, being the person you want to be, realizing that this is who you are. This is now the identity that you have as the desired future self, and you can start being that person in the present, which means you're actually letting the future dictate who you are and what you do in the present, and you're continuously healing, transforming, and growing from your past. This is a more powerful approach to time, by the way. Your past and your future are drafts. They're continuously updating, changing, evolving, and you're continuously evolving and updating and changing these, thus creating a much better present experience. Your present is based on the continually updating vision of your story of your past and the updating vision and story of your future. And these are both drafts that you can continuously adjust and change and tweak. A positive psychology in the present means you have an increasingly better past and an increasingly bigger future, a bigger and more purposeful future. And the research shows you can't have meaning in the present without connecting it to its future or its past. And so your whole experience in the present is based on your story of, your views of, your mastery of your past and your present selves. So back to journaling, because I gotta go. It's gotten a little too long. You can continually write about and heal and transform your past, any experiences, any episodes, any chapters of your life, and refine those, tweak those, and learn from them, recognize how different you are and how those happened for you, not to you. And then ultimately journaling about your future self. Who do you want to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 3 years from now? And then ultimately writing about who you want to be and how you want to do it. I journal every single day, and every day it's just a new and cleaned up draft of the book, of my future, and me getting clear on it. You can obviously also write down your goals for the day. One final practical component is journaling at night. Obviously, journaling in the morning, your brain's a lot more creative in the morning, and so I would journal about strategizing, like thinking about your goals, thinking about people you could reach out to, thinking about pathways of getting to your goals in the morning. At night, reflection. Rather than scrolling through your phone, don't be a drifter, actually be definitive. This is kind of what Napoleon Hill's whole work is people either drifters or reactive and being tossed to and fro, or they're definitive about their future self. The main point here is rather than inputting and staring at your phone right before bed, which is really bad for your subconscious, you ultimately want to journal at night, grateful for the day, and frame the day in the gain, right? Or frame the day as a positive, as valuable, and squeeze as much value out of it so that you're constantly better because of today rather than worse off because of today. And so you could write 3 things you're grateful for from that day. You could also write down 3 things you learned that day, 3 reasons why you're better as a result, and your future will be better as a result because of today. And then I would say when it comes to quote unquote a to-do list, you could frame the day in the positive by saying why you're better and you've learned things and also positive experiences and growth from that day, but also write down 1 to 3 things you will accomplish the next day, no more than 3. If you have an item like a 10 to 10 list to-do list for your day, then you're not applying the 80-20 principle. The 80-20 principle says that 80% of your results comes from 20% of what you do. You want to focus on high quality, less quantity of all things. You want to pay attention to only a few things and focus on impact, not busyness. And so when it comes to thinking about on a strategic level or even on a practical level, what do I want to accomplish today or this week? No more than 3 things. No more than 3 things for the year. Big things, big fish. Rather than catching a bunch of small fish, catch big fish. No more than 3 big things for the year. And there's a lot of research on this. Jim Collins in the book Good to Great said if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. Gino Wickman, who's wrote the book Traction, has been studying entrepreneurs for years. You got to make the goals bigger, but less. No more than 3 priorities. So 3 big things for the year, personal and professional, whatever they are, but 3 big things for the year, 3 big things for the quarter, 3 big things for the month, and you can keep tweaking these. So tomorrow, no more than 3 things you're going for, but make sure that they're of high impact, high quality, less quantity, so that you're going deeper rather than shallow. High quality, less quantity is how you transform your life. So hope this was helpful. You can journal about the past, present, and the future. You can use your journal to continually heal, transform, reframe the past, experience gratitude, love, forgiveness, and you can use your journal to get clear on your future self and strategize towards your future self. One last thing I'll actually say, and this is one that's really helped me, is on the inside cover of my journals, I actually ask myself 5 questions every month. The first one is, where am I? Where am I now? And so I just write down like 5 bullets of where am I now? What is my life like? What am I working on? What am I dealing with? Then I write down my wins for the last 90 days. What are just the wins, the forms of progress, meaningful experiences I've had in the last 90 days? Then I write down what are the wins I want to have in the next 90 days? What are the things I want to accomplish, the experiences I want to have in the next 90 days? Then I write who's my future self 12 months from now. Write down 3 things that I want to see as my future self. And then I write down who's my future self 36 months from now. Those are 5 questions I answer every month. And the answers change because I'm constantly making a new draft of my future self and my past self. Hope this helps. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I'm writing a book right now called How to Stretch Time, and it's based on 3 core premises. That time is holistic, not sequential. It's holistic because the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. That's true in physics. It's also true in psychology. Time is also the distance that you travel from the perspective you have. Time is a perspective, and thus time is subjective. And you can actually travel as much distance in terms of meaning, progress, growth in a day as some people do in a year if you have that approach mindset and you're willing to transform and go deep rather than shallow. So look out for that book, How to Stretch Time, soon. And if you haven't done so yet, check out 10X is Easier Than 2X, my book with Dan Sullivan, Be a Future Self Now, and also another book with Dan Sullivan, which is The Gap in the Game. Hope this was helpful. Talk to you guys later.